I don't think myself, or any of the other delivery boys that I worked with, would ever have expected how happy we'd be when our restaurant finally got a GPS service to determine whether delivery orders were giving us real addresses or not. Before that, all we had in the restaurant was a map next to the phone with our delivery radius on it. And if that street that whoever ordered lived on fell in the radius, we would deliver without any issue. And believe it or not, when I first started, we used to get a lot of prank calls that would have us deliver decent-sized orders to abandoned plots of land or dead-end roads that have property numbers, but no one actually lived at them. For the most part, it was always just a waste of time, and the cost of food would typically come out of our paychecks at the end of each week. We eventually had some of the regularly used addresses for the prank orders listed near the phone, so we knew to ignore orders coming in from those locations. But every now and then they got us. I can't even begin to explain what happened to one of the orders that I was the delivery boy on. It was toward the beginning of the summer, and we received a call for multiple entrees and a few apps to be sent out to an address that I didn't quite recognize. But the street was in our delivery radius, so we accepted it. After the food was prepped, I loaded up my car, double-checked for any other orders that needed to go out, and then began my delivery. I punched the address into my TomTom GPS, and it said that it should only take me about 12 minutes to get there. And since it was around 8:30 at night by that point, the roads were practically empty, so I was able to make it to the supposed destination without any issues. But when I pulled up to the address, I was confused, because instead of a house or an abandoned lot, all I could see was a trail that led back into the woods. Now the trail was a little bit wider than a car, so I figured that this might have been a driveway. And I'll be honest, I got a little excited for a second, thinking I was about to see a really nice house or something. Boy, was I wrong. I slowly began to turn onto the trail that my GPS was telling me was the address that I was supposed to be at. It made my way down the dark, slightly overgrown gravel trail. I have to admit though, it was only about 10 seconds after pulling onto the trail that the excitement of possibly seeing a fancy house in the woods faded, and I quickly realized that I was basically in the middle of nowhere, by myself, driving down a dark trail. I double-checked that my doors were locked as I continued to drive forward, but I was surprised when I was forced to come to a quick stop. The trail suddenly came to an end, and all that I could see ahead of me were trees and the shadows casting off of them from my headlights. I let out a loud sigh as I realized that we had been pranked again, and that instead of potentially earning a decent tip, I was going to lose money on that trip. I started looking around to figure out how I was going to turn the car around and decided to just do a K-turn. As I was about halfway through turning my car around, my headlights were now pointing into the woods that were off to the side of the trail. I looked down as I put my car back forward, and as I looked back up, I practically felt my heart jump out of my chest. Standing in the woods about 10 feet away from the trail was a figure who was wearing a black pullover hoodie, and they were facing my way. I turned the steering wheel and finished turning my car around and began pulling away from the person who was now basically standing right next to my passenger side window. And it looked like they were reaching out as if they were going to try to open the door. I made my way down the gravel trail much faster than when I was driving down it the first time, and I kept checking my rearview mirror to make sure that I wasn't being chased. I thought I was in the clear as I approached the entrance of the trail, but before I could make it to the road, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I slammed on the gas and ripped off of the trail and onto the road and drove away as fast as I could. Once I was clear, I took a second to look into the back seat, where I saw a bunch of broken glass from the rear windshield that had broken, and sitting on the seat was a rock the size of a baseball. I went back to the restaurant and then called the police to report the incident before adding that address to the list of places not to deliver to. One of the most interesting jobs that I ever had, surprisingly enough, was when I delivered pizzas in and around Utica. Almost every night that I was working, I either met someone interesting that I would deliver food to, or sometimes I'd even run into my friends who ordered pizza and would hang out with them for a couple of minutes before dropping their food off. But the most interesting thing that's ever happened to me is still sort of hard to explain, and honestly could have just been my nerves getting the better of me. But we received an order to a house that I had passed by multiple times in my delivery routes, but we had always just assumed that no one lived there. When the call came in asking for 2 pizzas, though, we were happy to oblige, and once they were finished cooking, I promptly made my way to the address. The house was a 2-story, light blue-colored farmhouse, and as I pulled into the driveway, I still wasn't fully convinced that it wasn't abandoned. The grass was overgrown, and it didn't look like any of the lights were on, but still, I figured there was no harm in knocking, so I pulled up the driveway and then made my way to the front door with the food in my hand. I knocked on the front door and waited for about a minute for no one to answer. I decided to knock one more time before bringing the pizza back to the restaurant, but this time when I did, the door actually opened. No one was on the other side of it though, so I figured that my knocking must have opened the door. I didn't want to just walk in, so I called out that I was there with the pizza that someone had ordered and waited to see if anyone would come to the door or not. And to my surprise, I swear that I got a response. After a couple of seconds, someone responded from down the hallway. They yelled out, "Come in, I'll be right there." I stepped through the threshold of the door and waited for the man who answered to come walking down the hallway, but they never came. I waited for about 2 minutes and then called out again to let them know that I had other deliveries to make if we could hurry up. And again, I got a response telling me to come inside. I informed them that I was already inside and asked if they wanted me to bring the pizza to them for some reason. They didn't answer, but I really needed to get back to work, so I decided to slowly start walking down the hallway. I made it a couple of steps down the hallway before a loud slam made me jump and almost drop the pizzas. I turned around to see what had happened and was surprised to see that the front door had closed shut behind me. My eyes widened and I called out again. But this time you could hear the fear in my voice when I asked if anyone was there to take the food from me. This time I didn't get any response though. "Hello?" I called out. But still, there was nothing. At that point, I'd freaked myself out and decided that I should probably just go back to my car. But as I tried to open the door, I noticed that it was stuck. I began to freak out a bit and ended up putting the pizzas down so that I could use both hands to pull on the door as hard as I could. This time it came flying open, and I quickly made my way out of the house, but froze in place before I could get into the car. My eyes widened, and I swear I felt my heart stop as I heard the front door of the house slam shut, followed by the sound of someone screaming at the top of their lungs in what sounded like rage. I made my way back to work and explained to my boss what happened, and he thought it was equally weird. But to make things worse, as I told some of my friends about that story, all of them swore to me that nobody lived in that house. It had apparently been vacant for almost 15 years by that point. To this day, I'm still not sure why I was called to deliver a pizza there, and who was in that house with me when I went to deliver it. From the ages of 18 to 32, I've worked various food delivery jobs as I moved from city to city trying to pursue a music career. And when I tell you that every city is different, I mean it. For instance, when I lived in New York, there was a point where I delivered pizzas on a bicycle. When I lived in San Antonio, Texas, that wasn't possible, and I needed an actual car to deliver food to places that were sometimes 30 to 40 minutes away. So I feel like I've seen it all. And if there is one city that I would tell you to be careful in when you're delivering anything, it's definitely Austin, Texas, at least when I worked there. I'll never forget the night that I was sent to deliver Chinese food to an apartment in St. John's, which if you don't know, was one of the more dangerous areas in the city. But I had delivered to this area in the past and had never had an issue, so that night I figured it would be no different. The order came in around 6 p.m., and I was at their doorstep in less than a half hour. The apartment complex wasn't anything fancy, but it also wasn't worn down, and it looked like a lot of people lived there, considering how hard it was to find a parking spot. But I ended up finding one across the way from the apartment that had placed the order, and as soon as I knocked, someone was there ready to answer. A man quickly opened the door with a big smile on his face, and I began reading off the order and told him the cost of it all. And it seemed like everything was as he ordered it, but when he reached for his wallet, he acted like it wasn't there and said he had to grab it real quick. I told him that was fine, and he asked if I wanted to wait inside. I figured it wasn't a big deal. The man seemed normal enough, so that's exactly what I did. but as soon as I stepped through the door, I instantly regretted it. The door slammed shut, and someone jumped out from behind it and smacked me over the head with what looked like a wrench. I fell to the floor, and by the time I looked up, 4 different people were standing over me. I started to look around and could see that the apartment that I was in didn't have any furniture in it. And right away, I knew what was going on. I was being robbed. One of the men kicked me and told me to pay attention to them, and they began explaining that all they wanted was my car and my wallet. I didn't say anything and went to reach into my back pocket for my wallet. But before I could, 2 of them began punching me, telling me that I shouldn't be moving. I told them that my wallet was in my back pocket and the car keys were in my left front pocket. One of the men reached into my pockets and pulled out everything that I had before asking me which car was mine and where I parked it. I didn't answer fast enough, and they began hitting me again. Through the blows, I blurted out that I had a red Civic and had parked it across the parking lot. That was when the man with the wrench stepped forward, and the last thing I remember is seeing him swinging it towards my head. I woke up an hour or so later and stumbled outside into the parking lot. Thankfully, one of the neighbors saw that I had a head wound, and they sat with me as I waited for the police and an ambulance. I needed 4 stitches on my forehead and 2 staples in the back of my head. And the police ended up recovering my car about 2 weeks later, after it was involved in an accident on the highway. None of the assailants were found, though.